Hey everyone, and welcome back to a brand new explainer. We've got a really massive story to unpack today, and it's one that is quite literally sending shockwaves right through Capitol Hill. We're talking about a highly controversial, totally unprecedented $1.776 billion anti-weaponization fund. This settlement isn't just making headlines, it's actually tearing the Republican Party apart and stalling major national legislation right before our eyes. So we're going to unpack exactly what this fund is, where it came from, and why it's triggered such a massive political earthquake.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our agenda for today. First, the $1.8 billion fund. Second, origins of the settlement. Third, who gets the money. Fourth, the Senate GOP backlash. And finally, House versus Senate divide.
All right, Section 1, the $1.8 billion fund, a massive settlement. To really put this into perspective, we are talking about a $1.776 billion payout. It's essentially an anti-weaponization fund, and President Trump is firmly standing behind it. Now, what makes this so fascinating to watch unfold is that he's backing this taxpayer-funded settlement even as Republican senators are vocally condemning the whole idea. Because this involves $1.776 billion of taxpayer money, your money, the sheer scale of this thing has immediately turned it into a flashpoint. It's threatening to divide his party even further at a really critical time.
Moving on to Section 2, Origins of the Settlement, from tax returns to settlement.
So the origins of this fund actually stem from a dispute over leaked tax returns. President Trump recently posted on social media that he, quote, gave up a lot of money in allowing this fund to be created. He claims he could have settled his original lawsuit against the IRS over his leaked tax returns for $10 billion, or maybe even more. So from his perspective, this $1.776 billion settlement is a compromise. But the mechanics behind how this lawsuit actually got settled, well, they're raising some major eyebrows.
And that brings us to this timeline, which is based on reporting from the New York Times. Back when this lawsuit was active, IRS lawyers actually prepped several ways to fight Trump's $10 billion suit. They wrote up this detailed 25-page memo and passed it right along to the Treasury Department. But ultimately, the Justice Department, which reports to the president, of course, chose to just never fight the lawsuit. Now, in the legal world, completely skipping a lengthy courtroom battle over a $10 billion claim is incredibly rare. That decision to simply not contest the suit in court is what led directly to this highly unusual settlement and the creation of this massive fund. They essentially bypassed the standard lengthy courtroom battles entirely.
Section 3, who gets the money? Confidentiality and controversy.
Let's move to how this built, because the structure of this fund is incredibly unique. It was designed by close political and legal allies of the president, folks who strongly argue he and others were mistreated by the Justice Department. Here's how it works. 5, as of yet unnamed members, are chosen to manage the fund. They're going to operate under rules that are largely completely confidential, and theoretically, anyone can apply for a payout. Now, the White House absolutely insists these 5 individuals are going to prevent this from becoming a feeding frenzy. But critics, they're pointing out that there are virtually no public details, and they're basically putting out a ton of taxpayer money on the honor system.
And well, we are already seeing some deeply controversial applications. For instance, $35 million. That's the staggering amount currently being requested from the fund by a man named Ryan Nichols, who was a January 6 defendant.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core of the controversy. This is a direct quote from a video of Nichols from January 6th. Nichols ultimately pleaded guilty to 2 felonies tied to that day, including assaulting law enforcement officers, and he was sentenced to more than 5 years in prison. But he then received a pardon from President Trump on day 1 of his second administration. To add to that, Nichols was actually arrested just recently in Texas on separate charges of harassment and deadly conduct. Yet, under the rules of this new fund, he is actively seeking $35 million as a victim of abuse.
Which naturally leads us to an absolutely crucial question regarding oversight. Will the public ever actually know who gets this taxpayer money? Like, if someone like Ryan Nichols is awarded millions of dollars, are we ever going to find out?
Well, the legal reality here is pretty murky. During a recent meeting on Capitol Hill, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche testified under oath that he'd be as transparent as possible with the names and amounts, barring any specific privacy carve-outs. However, on paper, within the actual settlement itself, there's absolutely no legal requirement to release who gets the money or how much they receive. And because Blanche is currently only the acting attorney general, future officials who take that office could simply turn around and say, hey, we aren't bound by a promise made by our predecessor, meaning they could keep the payouts completely confidential.
Section 4, the Senate GOP backlash, a divided party.
Now, what's really interesting here is the intense emotional resonance and honestly the pure anger coming from the Senate regarding this fund.
Former Republican leader Mitch McConnell delivered this stark, blistering rebuke. He flat out called it a slush fund to pay people who assault cops. The vibes in the Senate chamber are reportedly the worst they have been in years. Even Senator Ron Johnson, who actually supports the fund, admitted that introducing it at this specific time was a galactic blunder.
And we're seeing severe, real-world legislative consequences happening right now. Senate Republicans actually abruptly left town without passing the president's key immigration package. Why? Well, because the weaponization fund was tied into it, and it derailed the entire process. Senators like Todd Young were practically begging to redirect the focus back to border security, an issue that unites them, but they are terrified. I mean, they just watched Senator Bill Cassidy get ousted, and they saw Senator John Cornyn, a former Republican whip, get slapped with a Trump-endorsed primary challenger. There's this palpable fear in the Senate that if you cross the president on this fund, it could literally end your political career.
All right, Section 5, House versus Senate divide, a chamber clash.
So the crucial point is the absolute stark contrast in how Republicans in the two chambers of Congress are reacting to this. On one side, you've got the Senate Republicans. They are furious, they're panicking, they're abandoning major immigration legislation and calling the timing a galactic blunder. But then you look at the other side of the Capitol, and House Republicans are largely supportive. They view this fund as necessary justice for people they believe have been systematically wronged by the court system.
Take this quote from Republican Representative Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. It perfectly captures the intensity of this infighting. He flat out calls the Senate's hesitation a gutless move. House Republicans are arguing that this all started with the courts being used as a weapon against the president and his allies. To them, this $1.8 billion fund finally provides everyday folks access to justice that they otherwise just wouldn't have, and they are demanding that the Senate get on board.
And that brings us to the core of this entire explainer. We are looking at unprecedented legislative gridlock. We've got a massive taxpayer payout with virtually no guaranteed public oversight and a political party practically at war with itself. It leaves us with this really provocative thought. Where exactly is the limit to party loyalty when $1.8 billion of taxpayer money is at stake? Is the Senate going to fall in line, or will this fund continue to derail the legislative agenda? It is a fascinating constitutional and political stress test, and I highly encourage you to keep a close eye on how this all unfolds. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.